that work.
Oops.
It's okay. That work is hard as us. Like I really haven't run into any people that work as hard as alcoholics when they're sober or drinking. Um, and again, this paragraph is trying to sell the employer and why the alcoholic should be saved. But I also like when we talk about how we can use this as a sponsor to a sponsee, and like, and even that paragraph you left off on last week, like I have to ask myself those things as well when it comes to a sponsee. Like sometimes we hear in the rooms, like, God, they just didn't want it enough. Like, and as David said, like when I know what I suffer from, I don't have that attitude, or I don't have that kind of thinking around they just didn't want it enough. I know that whoever is here and they are not taking this spiritual action, that they're gonna drink. That's just it. But I'm going to be here. Like I've heard it in the rooms, like we don't fire anyone. There's no such thing. Like you're come back, my door is always open. And so I like asking those questions to myself as well when we can be so, not saying use me, like when we can be judgmental, and I can be judgmental. But yeah, and that's all I got to say on that's all I got to say on that. But I do have another little note because Howard just gave me something. Like, he's just after saying to me, like, we maintain this $200 habit a day without a job. And that's true. Even if I have no job, I always get the money to get what I want, when I want, where I want it. Like, we are smart. And that's what I was thinking actually when I was reading this. Like, I always knew how to get what I want, like to use or to drink. And also, yeah, like how many non-alcoholics or non-addicts could do that? Like earthlings. Like I don't think they could do that every day. So that's all I got on that. Thanks, David.
That's such a great point. And I'm not going to call anybody out, but I got one of my guys here tonight and we just sat down and I try to follow the directions in the big book, working with others. And I sit down with him for the first time and find out all I can about him. We went out for lunch. We spent 2.5 hours together. And dude, his story, oh my God, it was like a movie reel. It was like crazy. The stuff that we did without a job, with a wife, no wife, with children, no children. Like, holy cow. I mean, he knows. And I said to him, I go, but you never have to live like that ever again. Because we have a guaranteed solution for this, right? Because that's the hardest gig I've ever had in my entire life, copying the way I was copying. It was ridiculous. I know guys that were stealing from all the stores and buy or stealing things and then returning them. I mean, the same, like walk out with stolen merchandise and walk right back in. It's like, this is before surveillance cameras and all this other stuff. But oh my God, yeah, we're very clever people. Not so much to be proud of because that's very dishonest today for me. But yeah, great point. Thank you.
Absolutely. Um, okay, so can you discard the feeling that you're dealing only with habit, with stubbornness, or a weak will? If this presents difficulty, rereading chapters 2 and 3, where the alcoholic sickness is discussed at length, might be worthwhile. You, as a businessman, want to know the necessities before considering the result. If you can see that your employee is ill, can he be forgiven for what he has done in the past? Can his past absurdities be forgotten? Can it be appreciated that he has been a victim of crooked thinking directly caused by the action of alcohol on his brain?
Do you have anything, June?
Oop, I have concede, which is accept or acknowledge, and absurdities, which are ridiculous actions.
Thank you, June. All right, so can you discard the feelings that you are dealing only with habit, with stubbornness, or weak will? So next, I'm going to go to the next sentence because if this presents difficulty, because that's why because it's a question and Bill answers. Bill does this phenomenal thing in the big book. He poses questions for us and he answers them directly, and then he gives the practical program of action. Like you don't have to like read a whole chapter and then wait for the answer to come. Like sit in suspense over the whole thing. Like it's not a. This is a novel. This is a teaching tool. This is a treasure map to the treasure. the instructions on how to get well, how to build a relationship with my creator. So Bill says, can you discard the feelings that you're dealing with habit and stubbornness or weak will? If this presents difficulty, rereadings chapters 2 and 3. I just want to do a paragraph, a little bit of a paragraph. We read this a lot of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous anyways. So if we go back to page 30, because he addresses, go to chapters 2 and 3. If we go to page 30 in the very first paragraph in the chapter more about alcoholism, it says most of us have been unwilling to admit that we're real alcoholics. What is a real alcoholic? One who has an allergy, an obsession, and a malady. No person likes to think he is bodily, which is the allergy, and mentally, which is the obsession, different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove to who? To myself, is what I'm trying to prove, and maybe to others, we could drink like other people. Here's the delusion. The idea that somehow, someday he will control, underline the word control, and enjoy, underline the word enjoy, because I stopped doing that a very long time ago. His drinking is a great obsession. The idea is so strong that it makes me believe the lie. That is an obsession. And it sounds just like me in my head. So I believe it. So it's a great obsession of every abnormal drinker. Am I an abnormal drinker? The answer is absolutely. The persistence of this is the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue into the gates of insanity, encircle that, and death. So that was one reference, and then it says then it also addresses that we should read chapter 3. And if we go to page 44 in the very first paragraph, which I call the qualifying paragraph, that I will sit down with the new person and find out if they're real alcoholic or drug addicts. In the top of that page here, in We Agnostics, it says in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. Well, of course, this is a textbook, and I've studied this book, so I should have some basic understanding and be armed with some facts about what a real alcoholic is. And after this page here, after page 43, we're not going to talk about alcohol in our bodies anymore. We're done talking about that. We're going to talk about the obsession, and we're going to talk about the malady, and we're going to talk about the solution. And the solution is spiritual in nature. And then it says, we hope we have made clear distinctions between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And I just pointed out what that was, so I won't be redundant. If when you honestly want to, this is the question, David, when you honestly want to, do you find you cannot quit entirely? So we take statements in the big book and we turn them into questions. And the question there is, can I quit entirely? And which is related to the obsession of the mind. And that my answer is no. Or if when you're drinking, you have little control over the amount you take. That is the allergy. That is of the body. And I have very little control. I set out to have 2. I'm sitting in the bar with all my friends, and then Johnny comes in. And when Johnny comes in the bar, I think, oh, I'm going to stick around for a while. I thought I changed my mind. And I stick around and have 22. That is not what happened. I did not change my mind. I broke out in craving, and I had to continue to drink until I couldn't get any more, couldn't do it anymore. And then here's the question that some people blow right by this. I'm not gonna. I think it's so important because it is our solution and the only one that we offer. If that be the case, David, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Do I believe that only a spiritual experience will conquer what I have? I have run out of ideas how to stay sober on my own power. So absolutely, I will buy into this. Bill is selling us something. He's a salesman. He does a great job of it. And I think that's very true for me. So back to the text here again, because we reread chapters 2 and 3, or at least I picked out 2 of my favorite paragraphs, where the alcoholic sickness is discussed at length. So absolutely at length, and I think those are 2 really good paragraphs to just summarize what he's talking about. So it says, you as a businessman want to know the necessities before considering the result. If you can see that your employee, if you can see that your sponsee is ill, can he be forgiven for what he has done in the past? And I asked this question of sponsees. What kind of relationship do you have? Do you have a relationship with a higher power? And in most cases, I have not ever really run into an atheist. I just haven't. Some are agnostic, but not atheists. So there's a difference in the agnostic, just without knowledge of this, or a God of their childhood is what they're living with. And so I asked them, do you believe that God can forgive you for the things you've done in the past? And a lot of times they just say flat out say no. I said, well, then this is why we need to do this work. Because the God of my no understanding, and I do mean no understanding, because if I have an understanding of God, in my experience, that's putting limits on the power of God. But my no understanding of God is he's forgiving, loving, caring, and very timely. And that's how he showed up in my life for a few 24 hours. Can he be forgiven what he has done in the past? Can this past absurdities be forgotten? So, can it be appreciated that he has been a victim of crooked thinking? What is crooked thinking in the 1938 dictionary? Bill is really purposeful in his definitions. That means dishonest. Dishonest thinking, believing the lie that I can pick up a drink and or I can control the amount that I drink. Both of them are lie. And then it says directly caused by the action of alcohol on his brain. So alcohol is my solution until one day it's not. And what they're told me on page 44 is what I'm suffering is from this illness that only a spiritual experience will conquer. Am I willing to go to any lengths? My answer for that is when they say yes and they don't really know why they're saying yes, I say it's being honest and thorough and doing this work shoulder to shoulder. That's all I got.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I love this paragraph and really good job on that, David. Um, it's a big ask, isn't it, for the employer? Like, it's okay if they've read this book and they might get a little bit more in depth, but it's a big ask, and like it's just the requirements of the employer to work with the employee. Like, this is what they're going to have to do. Like, can the employer get rid of old ideas about alcoholism? Like, can they set all that aside? Can the employer let go of the things that he has done or I've done in the past? Like, that's a big ask. And like I was like, again, like like when I'm sponsoring, like I have to ask myself these things as well. Can you concede that that person who returns is ill, that they can be forgiven for what they've done in the past? Like perhaps they don't show up for step work, perhaps they're calling when they're drunk all the time, but they're not showing up, they're not doing their step work. Can I put all that aside when they ask me for help, when they're going in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous like I did for 4 years? Can I remember what it was like? Can I forgive them for that? Not forgive, but put that aside and start anew. And see that I'm dealing with a sick and suffering alcoholic just like me. And yeah, and Howard was just giving me a little thing about the victim of crooked thinking caused by the action of alcohol in his brain, and that came from a book called Edward Cowlis. Cowlis, is it?
He wrote it.
Yeah, he wrote it, and he talks about the pressure of the spinal fluid ruptured the brain. Anything else? Am I missing
No,
that?
you can find it in Cora Finch's book.
Cora
Stealth
Finch's
Fire.
book. So yeah. And yeah, I love that. And actually I find it personally so helpful, this chapter, by identifying with the sponsor and sponsee. But of course with employer as well and employee, because it is to the employers. But that's all I got on that. Thanks, David.
Oh, thank you.
I'm reading. Okay. So I well remember the shock I received when a prominent doctor in Chicago told me of cases where pressure of the spinal fluid actually ruptured the brain. No wonder an alcoholic is strangely irrational. Who wouldn't be with such a feveric brain? Normal drinkers are not so affected, nor can they understand the abbreviations of the alcoholic. I was a bit early with that. So over to you.
Okay. So I'm always nervous when Howard's here because I want to make sure. So I've studied with Howard for a long time, and I'm glad that Rob put this in the chat so that I know at least my notes are correct. So Dr. Collis studied at McLean Hospital. You can read the rest of the bio on him right there. But this is the doctor that they're talking about. Like I believe it's in Earl Treat's story, which is the chapter that he sold himself short. So I'm a little nervous sometimes because I take my notes, but I haven't read these notes in a long, long time. So I believe that's the truth. That's who this doctor is they're talking about. So back to what Kathy just read to us. So I well remember the shock I received when a prominent doctor in the Chicago told me of cases where pressure of spinal fluid actually ruptured the brain. Would that stop you from drinking if the doctor told you that? You know what I would do? Like, oh my God, this is horrible. I really need a drink. I have to have a drink right now. That's what I would hear. No wonder an alcoholic is strangely irrational. That is exactly how I would thought. Who wouldn't be with such a fevered brain? What is a fevered brain? That is a disease state that I'm in. Normal drinkers, people who can take it or leave it, are not so affected. They won't have to worry about spinal fluid building up and rupturing their brain, nor can they understand the abbreviations of the alcoholic. So, what I think they're saying there is, I don't understand the way the normal drinker drinks, and they don't understand the way I drink. I think that's basically it. And that's all I have on that paragraph.
Thanks, David. I don't have anything on that paragraph.
They
Uh,
have a couple of definitions, if I may.
Absolutely.
Okay, fevered brain is a sickened, affected, or heated. And aberrations are abnormal actions or deviations from the proper or expected course. Thank you.
Thank you. Your man has probably been trying to conceal a number of scrapes, perhaps pretty messy ones. They may be disgusting. You may be at a loss to understand how such a seemingly above board chap could be so involved, but these scrapes can generally be charged no matter how bad the abnormal action of alcohol on his mind. When drinking or getting over a bout, an alcoholic seems a model of honesty. When normal will do incredible things, afterward his revulsion will be terrible. Nearly always these antics indicate nothing more than temporary conditions. Where do you?
Yeah, so your man has probably been trying to conceal a number of scrapes. So if I'm reading this as a sponsee, and I made my approach. They said they're willing to go to any lengths. We immediately set a date, and it's pretty quickly, maybe even right there in the moment, that we're going to go look at step one. And usually, and this is I don't have a lot of time. I really don't, and they don't either. That Howard does a lead on window of opportunity, and it's an amazing thing because if you really think about it, how short is that window of opportunity? We don't ever know. We don't know the timeline. So we need to get him to a power greater than himself right now. Triage. Let's go. They pulled up at the meeting. I approached them. I don't wait for them to approach me. I was in a meeting on Monday night, and someone brought up during the meeting, they said, why don't we raise our hands any longer and ask who's available to be sponsors? And then why don't we ask the new person if they need a sponsor? And each group is autonomous. I address the meeting at the very end. I like to wait sometimes and see what God wants to take me. And I said, hey, why don't you bring that up in the next business meeting? Because each group is autonomous and take a group conscious. I said, or how about if you approach the new guy? Because I'm thinking you guys, if I'm new and I walk into a meeting, I'm thinking I ain't asking any of you sketchy people to be my sponsor. There's no way in the world I'm doing that. You guys all look sketchy to me. Every one of you. You're way too happy. You actually got a couple bucks in your pocket. I'm not asking anybody in that meeting. So I don't think putting someone on the spot, that's just my experience, I'm going to act out. I'm not going to do that necessarily. So if I approach them as a recovered alcoholic, armed with the facts about myself, I could generally win the confidence of a suffering alcoholic over in just a few hours. That's the directions in working with others too. So back to the text here, they may be discussing, you may be at loss to understand how such a seemingly above board chap could be so involved. So if I don't make my sobriety a priority, if I am not willing to go to any lengths, if I set up an appointment with my sponsor and I have all kinds of excuses, and listen, some of them are legit, but I'm going to tell you not if I wasn't a recovered alcoholic, and when I very first time I came in 1993 and I got sober in 1999, I had all kinds of lies. I would tell you this and that and the other thing was going on, and I would miss all those appointments with my sponsor. And I was wasting volumes of times for him. It was disrespectful when I look back. I don't look at it necessarily disrespectful, but I will point out to the new guy that when we set a date and a time, we need to stay to that date and time because the clock is ticking. And dude, and especially if you're a drug addict and you stop at the corner and pick up your rock or you pick up your bag or you pick up whatever, look in the bag. It doesn't say the FDA approved that. Nowhere does it say the FDA approved that. By the time you find out that it's not approved, it's probably too late. So I'm just saying, yeah, there's all kinds of scrapes, generally charged no matter how bad to the abnormal action of alcohol on his mind. Because that is my solution. Why? And if a guy is a relapser, why are we so surprised that he relapsed? We should not be surprised. The only bad part about a relapse is, well, first of all, if you don't learn from it, number one. But if I can prevent my own relapse, then I'm not an alcoholic. I don't need to go to AA or Cocaine Anonymous or any other A. I can't prevent my own recovery. I get in the way of my own recovery, and I have to know that. But then it says when drinking or getting over about an alcoholic, sometimes the model of honesty, when normal, which is there are very few times that's really true. I still don't really classify myself as normal because think about it. It's delusional that I think I can have a resentment. My neighbor can have a resentment against his neighbor, but I can't afford to have a resentment against my neighbor. I can't. It's delusional. So we'll do incredible things. Afterward, the revulsion will be terrible. That's guilt, remorse, and shame that I will probably feel. And nearly always, these antics indicate nothing more than temporary condition. So I'm going to leave it at that because I got a little something in the next paragraph, and I don't want to spoil it.
And I have a few definitions.
Awesome.
I have conceal, which is keep from sight or hide. Above board, which is honest or straightforward. And antics, which are crazy, odd, or extreme actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, June. Thanks, David. Yeah, I love that, David. And like, I just remind, and I like as well, like that the employers trying to be reminded, or what's the word, prepared for what he has to deal with when it comes to us alcoholics. And the same is applicable to like being a sponsor and sponsee. Like these are the things we're going to have to deal with. And I don't know about you guys, but I was sitting there like laughing to myself about how we're the model of honesty. And I thought I was so honest when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, but in actual fact, I'm a good manipulator. So
Mm.
I'm not very honest, but that's why we have the step work. But usually I'm a good worker and I do whatever you want because I'm terrified of you. And that's why I'm doing my work. But anyway, that's all I got. So I'll move on to the next paragraph. This is not to say that all alcoholics are honest. And
Mm.
upright when not drinking. Of course, that isn't so. And such people often may impose on you, seeing your attempt to understand and help. Some men will try to take advantage of your kindness. If you're sure your man does not want to stop, he may be as well, I beg your pardon, he may as well be discharged, the sooner the better. You're not doing him a favor by keeping him on. Firing such an individual may prove a blessing to him. It may be the jolt he needs. I know in my own particular case that nothing my company could have done would have stopped me for so long as I was able to hold my position. I could not possibly realize how serious my situation was. Had they fired me first, and had they taken steps to see that I was presented with the solution contained in this book, I might have returned to them 6 months later, a well man.
Do you have anything, Jim? I don't mean to cut you off. Okay, thank you. So yeah, so I look at this kind of like, they do a mention in the big book of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What is the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde exactly? A message of the Dr. Jekyll and Hyde is that all people have both good and evil within, right? Them and their choices determine who we are, but not with alcohol. I don't have a choice. Why do I? Sometimes I hear people say, "Well, I won't." And this is two different descriptions I'm going to give. One of them is I hear people come into a meeting, AM meeting, they go, "I was having a craving all night last night." No, you weren't. You're having an obsession. And I take that guy aside after the meeting and point that out to him because they mix the thing up. It's so important that we understand the language of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous so we can give an honest and thorough message to the whole thing. So here's the problem with the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as an alcoholic. Let's go to page 62 in the very first paragraph, and let's see if I can differentiate the truth from the false. See if I can make a choice. And this is true for me even today. Sometimes I believe I'm making a choice. Am I? Page 62, first paragraph. And oh, by the way, I love Bill and his writing because he tells us all about alcoholism up to this point, but he waited till page 62 to tell us what our real problem is. 62. Here it is. So if you don't study this book, you'll miss this. But this is me. Selfishness, self-centeredness. That we think is the root of our troubles. The root. How deep is that damn thing? Who knows? Pretty damn deep. But here's the problem. That we think is the root trouble. Driven. So am I in charge of anything when I'm being driven? Driven by what? 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. So I like to be dramatic. I'm going to add a little verbiage to the big book here and say there's 400 things blocking me from God. He said there's 100. I'm going to say each one of them, there's 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. 400 things blocking me from the power of God, from keep me staying sober. What do? We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. They push back. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation. Provocation means without reason. But we invariably find that sometime in the past, we have made decisions based on what? On self, which later places us in a position to be hurt. My problems aren't coming at me, they're coming from me. This was a revelation that I had to find out. So selfishness and self-centeredness. So one example that Mark Houston gives is that if you guys don't know who Mark Houston is, please listen to him. He's was a wonderful speaker and one of my favorites. And he actually didn't personally take me to the steps, but many times I'm listening to him again right now. Takes me through the work. I can't get enough of big book thumpers. I must refresh my memory and I pick up little tidbits. But he talks about this. Mark comes out to the curb, gets in the back of the limousine that's going to take him to the airport, and the guy turns around and says, "Hi, I'm Self Delusion, and I'm going to drive you around all day today, Mark." And the next day, he gets in the back of the limo, and the driver turns around and goes, "Hi, Mark, I'm Fear, and I'm going to drive you around all day today." Am I making choices, or am I being driven by fear, self delusion, self seeking, and self pity? I have to ask myself that. And it's a good topic to bring up in meetings because I think I'm making a choice. If I'm not spiritually fit, I'm probably being driven by one of those forms of things. So Bill's got I'm a little bit of a run on, and Bill's got a pretty run on long paragraph here. So let's go back to the paragraph. So I'm going to read this now as the sponsor. Seeing it, your attempt to understand. So of course this isn't so, and such people often may oppose on you. Seeing that, wait, yeah, I'm in the right spot. Seeing your attempt to understand and help, some men will try to take advantage of your kindness. If you're sure your man does not want to stop, he may as well be discharged. I heard sooner the better. I've heard Kathy say this, and I am the same line of thinking. I know how it is, and most of you all here. I have never fired anyone ever as a sponsee. Not my job. I've been fired lots of times. Oh my God. You just hurt my feelings. How dare you speak to me like that? And I'm pretty kind. I mean, I'm about making someone feel safe. And I think that's important to make someone feel safe. I sponsor a couple women in the program with my wife's permission. They've been sober for a very, very long time, but had never done the work. So when they asked me, I got my wife's permission. I took them through the work. So I make sure that, but not one size fits all with all sponsees. I think there's a different way to go about that. And I bring God in all day, every time. I pray before this meeting. I pray when I get up in the morning. I pray at night. I pray before I get with someone. I pray before I go on a Zoom meeting, a live meeting. I pray all the time. I'm always inviting God in. So I'm not firing anybody. It's not my job. That's just my ego thinking that I need to get rid of. Now, have I strongly suggested that you go get a different sponsor so that you don't listen to anything I suggest that you do? Absolutely. I've done that many times. Do they do it? No. And then they show up in a meeting 5 years later and they go, "Hey, sponsor." I'm like, "Remind me who you are again." It's like, dude, you know, it's just, it's funny. It's not even comical sometimes because it's heartbreaking, but I'm not firing anyone. So firing such an individual may prove a blessing to him. But actually, I'm not a big fan of saying, keep drinking, keep drugging, you'll figure it out. Because I don't know that they will. I think they'll just drink themselves to death or die. But I don't want them to lose my phone number. I don't want them to call me when they're drunk necessarily, but I will make the time to sit down with them. And it's amazing because I own my own business. I have a huge family. I have a lot of obligations and AA and CA and stuff like that. God always gives me a couple more hours in my day. I don't know why that. Daniel and I just spent hours and hours together over the last week, dude. It was just like I loved every minute of it. I've known Daniel for 25 years, and I hadn't seen him in a long, long time. And when he called me, I was tickled to death. I was so tickled to death that my wife and I were going to a car wash, And and he called me, and my wife's like, "You're as giddy as a little girl that you haven't talked to this guy in 20 years. You're all excited." And I was like, "You're damn right. He's alive. He's not dead. There's an opportunity to get him on the path of recovery, and so he can have a personal relationship with his creator too. Let's get busy and do this work right now, right now. Not like, oh, let me try to squeeze you into my schedule." And God opened up my calendar, and we were able to do that. And he helped me way more than I helped him. But back to the very long paragraph in my very long diatribe here. It says, it may just jolt him he needs. I know in my particular case that nothing my company could have done would have stopped me from so long as I was able to hold my position. I lost my job. I had to come home and tell my family, an uneducated guy like me, I worked for a Fortune 500 company when I was in my early 30s. I had 5 kids, had a house payment, had 2 cars, and I couldn't pass a drug test, right? I mean, they knew me so well that I used to pass all the drug tests, but not that day because they brought a nurse to the into the to my employer and watched me pee in the bottle. And I was dead to rights. And it was my last time. And I had been busted before. And I had to come home and tell my wife. Hopeless as can be. But guess what? And this is not a story that happens to everybody. You know, sometimes, and drinking and drugging wasn't the thought, it was self pity. Poor me. Do you understand? Like, oh my God, I just got the raw end of the stick. And someone showed up in my life, and I got another job that was even better than that next day. Is there a problem? Mm-mm. There's no problem anymore. Problem solved. We are smart people. I figured it all out, right? Did I continue to drink? You bet your butt I did, because I had no spiritual solution. I didn't even know what the problem was, and I was going to meetings for a long, long time, and nobody told me what the problem and the solution was. Nobody ever said that to me, and if they did, I must have had the cotton in my ears because I didn't hear it. Eventually, I heard it, and I'm so blessed to have it. So back to the text here. I could not possibly realize how serious my situation was. I don't know how serious this is until someone really explains it to me. That I will never have power, choice, and control ever, 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 ever. I desperately need AACA. I desperately need a sponsor, and I desperately need God in my life. And all those things, God comes first. I do not worship my sponsor. I do not worship the big book. I have at times, or the steps. I worship the fact that I have a God in my life today that allows me to have all this freedom that I never even thought existed today. And I'm blessed to have that. And then back to the text, is that had they fired me first, he had the he had they then taken steps to see what I presented with the solution contained in this book. The solution is contained in this book. And I believe those are the 12 steps. And I believe it's the only place I'm going to find the directions to the steps to a spiritual experience. I mean, there's other ways to get sober. We have no monopoly on how to do that. But if you want what I have, let's do this work. Let's get busy right now. Those are the grindstone. Let's get busy and do this. And we spent 2 hours together and we got through the first 3 steps. And then Saturday we're doing a 4th step. And then dude, you better be ready to go early next week with number 5. And because the guy's been sober for a few 24 hours, I don't know if this is right or wrong. It doesn't say in the book, because he's done one before. We're going to do the resentment inventory first. I'm not going to say do all 3 inventories. It's just going to take too long. Let's do the resentment inventory. I'm going to help you write it out. I'm going to help you write the first 2 lines out, because I'm not going to just give you that thing and think that you know how to do it. And we're going to go up and down. We're not going to go left to right. And we're going to find out the column 1, column 2, and column 3 are lies. We're going to find the truth out in column 4. And you're going to be amazed. And I give them examples of what that looks like when we're having a conversation. But we're going to get busy, and when you get done with 5, you're gonna go home. You're gonna thank God from the bottom of your heart and spend 1 hour in meditation, quiet contemplation, and then you're gonna go to 6 right away, right away, 6 and 7. Then you're gonna come back to me. And we're gonna go over 8, and you're gonna pray for the willingness. We're gonna have a list. I'm not gonna edit it, but I'm gonna look at it. We're gonna talk about it. Then you get busy and start doing 9. And then as the minute you start doing 9, you're in 10. What? Yeah, you're in 10. And then you're going to live in the disciplines of 10, 11, 12 while you're making your amends to other people. And then you're going to understand the freedom of bondage of self. Then for the first time, you'll get to experience that. So sorry, I went on for forever and some, but thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, David. And welcome, Daniel. Welcome home. So glad you're here. Yeah, it doesn't take long to get well. And this part on this paragraph, it says, if you're sure your man does not want to stop, he may as well be discharged. The sooner the better. You are not doing him a favor by keeping him on. Firing such an individual may prove a blessing to him. So I'm going to swing back to the sponsor and sponsor-sponsee relationship after I do this with how it's addressed to employers. And I'm going to go over to page 116. And on page 116 into the wives, it talks about that you may be afraid your husband will lose his position. You're thinking of the disgrace and hard times which will befall you and the children. And so, in other words, like for the employer to fire me, to fire the alcoholic, it may be the blessing they need, because the more hopeless we are, the more we get that gift of desperation, and that gives us the willingness to do the work like David is doing with Daniel. There's no waiting around. Let's do this because I'm desperate and I'm dying. And as we know, this is not an outside illness, this is an internal illness. And so I was fired from a job before. I was only new to it. It didn't, like David, it didn't stop me from drinking or getting a job like pretty soon after that. So it wasn't necessarily like a solution, but what it did was it probably brought attention to my drinking. My family found out about that. But this paragraph, really, they're saying, like, don't be an enabler. Don't be an enabler. Now, when it comes to working with sponsees, like we're talking about like firing, like I don't fire anyone, just like I never hired anyone, so I don't fire them. We do fun and for free. And it's like, but I may have to have conversations that are so uncomfortable to me, and I'm sure not nice to the sponsee, which are when we make appointments, we show up. Unless there's an emergency, we cancel. We show up on time, and we're getting through this work because our life depends on doing this work. Because if we don't do it, we're not going to get well and we're going to drink. So there's that commitment, and this is what I expect of you, and this is what you can expect from me, and like we're walking hand in hand. And so I lay that out before we start doing the work. So there's no kind of like, well, I did not know that I needed to have this done by the next day, and I left you with an assignment. You know that all assignments given have to be done for the next day. If you have a problem, let me know. I'll help you. And so there's no confusion. And it's also like, as a sponsor, and learning through this process, we often hear things like, well, they didn't want it bad enough, or they just didn't show up. And like, again, that difficult conversation for me, not to be enabler, is like, hey, I understand things are going on. Yes, that's important too. But if you do not show up and do this work, the inevitable is going to happen. You're going to drink. I can't be an enabler and say, it's okay, don't worry about it, see you next time. It's okay, don't worry about it, see you next time. And for me, because I like to be liked, I mean, I hate those conversations. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I wish I didn't have all these sponsors to work with today. Hope they call in sick. And then it's like, when they call in sick, no, please, I don't want to have a conversation with you. Please, please. So that's how we can be an enabler. And the same as David, like I've had sponsees who've been, have taken through the work, and I made suggestions, and like they just can't hear me, whether send me the inventory, they want to and they just can't do it. And it's like, I have to do my inventory and then go to my sponsor parent mentee, and it's like, hey, maybe you're going to be able to hear this direction from someone else. It's not a like, hey, goodbye, find someone else. No, it's maybe you need to hear it from someone else, because I could be stale. You could be outgrowing my experience. You know what I mean? You may need someone else. So don't be an enabler, like, and yeah, that's yeah, that's all I got on that. So, but there are many men who want to stop, and with them you can go far. Your understanding treatment of their cases will pay dividends.
I have dividends, if I may, which are rewards or profits or shares from a surplus. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So Yeah, so I'm going to go back to page 18 in the fourth paragraph and the fifth paragraph, if you guys like. So, because what that paragraph is asking me is, but there are many men who want to stop. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, their outside world looks terrible. They don't know how bad their inside world, internal condition is. And with them, you can go far. But here's what I got to be as a sponsor. This is a great description of what a sponsor looks like. In the second paragraph, I'm going to read you. There are 10 conditions. If I'm looking for a sponsor, that I could interview them to see if they meet these conditions, because it's important that I have a. For me, I need a big book sponsor. And I remember my sponsor. I've had four, and when I moved, I asked this guy here, because I realized that when I moved for about 6 months, I really was sponsoring myself. That doesn't work out well. Please do that if you're thinking about it. Don't do it. It's a bad idea. I was irritable, restless, and discontent. Because I do need someone to be accountable to. But okay, so page 18, the fourth paragraph in the squiggly writing, as Joel and Charlie like to say. But the ex-prom drinker who has found the solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of an alcoholic in a few hours. That's been my experience over and over and over again. Until such an understanding can be reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So until they understand the nature of this illness, until I explain to them that I understand the nature of this illness, and then the work that I do is the solution for that, nothing can be accomplished. Then it says, this is the qualifying paragraph. This is the conditions that I'm looking for in a sponsor. The man who is making his approach has the same difficulty. It's number one condition. That he's obviously knows what he's talking about. The second condition that I'm looking for. That his whole department shouts at the new prospect. His whole department shouts, number three, at the new prospect, that he is a man with a real answer. Number four, there is no attitude of holier than thou, is number five. Nothing, whatever, except the sincere desire to be helpful, is number six. That there are no fees to pay, number seven. No axes to grind, number eight. No people to please, number nine. And no lectures to endure. These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, remember the approach words there, many take up their beds and walk again, recovered. So these are the dividends. If I'm armed with the facts about myself, I can help anyone. I am so confident that God shows up in these conversations with me, because if you ever sat there with another recovering alcoholic, or an alcoholic who's in the desperate stages of this disease, and the words that are coming out of your mouth, you go, oh my God, I should write these down. These are the most marvelous words I've ever used in my entire life. That is God. That is not me. It blows me away sometimes. I have this out of body experience, like God is flowing through me so I can be of service to him, because whenever two or more of us are gathered together, that has been my experience. The one helps the other, and the other helps me right back. So I think that's how I got there.
That's awesome, that jumping back to page 18. I did not know that. So I just learned something. Thanks, David. And I love that, because if we can aspire, if we can be these things with the new person, the sponsee or the prospect, like this is the understanding treatment. Like we know what this is about, and we know how to help, how to get the person to the solution, what to do with them. So I really love that. And where was I going to go with this? Yes. And this little paragraph I was told to me was a promise. And I love, thank you, June, for being our dictionary person tonight. Like dividends, I didn't look it up, but I was writing it down when I meant in my own words. But this profit that I get from working with another alcoholic is in the spiritual world. I make this profit. I get back more than I put in by working with another alcoholic who wants to get well, period. I get repaid triple. Like I think David was saying, like how his sponsee helped him more than he helped him, and that's exactly it. And it's so opposite compared to the material world, because the more you use something in the material world, the more it loses its value, right? But here we have to actually give it away to get it, and we get paid twofold. So absolutely lovely. That's all I have on that. And next paragraph. Perhaps you have such a man in mind. He wants to quit drinking and you want to help him, even if it be only a matter of good business. You now know more about alcoholism. You can see that he is mentally and physically sick. You are willing to overlook his past performances. Suppose an approach is made something like this.
Anything, June? Okay. Yeah, so okay, so there's a couple things that I do. So in the front of my big book, there's a blank page, right? Right in the very front, guys. If you didn't notice that, there's a blank page. And in the front of that page, when I get it, I give him, I make sure that guy has a big book. Daniel has a big book, a brand new one. Matter of fact, that night he had a big book because I didn't have an extra one in my truck. And I called one of my sponsees and he picked him up and took him to the meeting. And he gave him a big book that night. Then the next day, I got him a big book at the next meeting we went to. That's his big book. And in the front of that big book, I said, you write down your sobriety date. And then the next thing I want you to write in that book is when you said you're willing to go to any links, I want you to put that date down there too. Put the date down that you said you're willing to go to any links, because when you're 4 years sober or 3 years sober and you miss a couple appointments with me, or you can't get to those meetings because you had to work overtime, or you're not sponsoring anybody, I'm going to ask you to go back to the front blank cover of that book. I'm going to say, on this day, you said you were willing to go to any links. What happened? I always have to be willing to go to any links. Why? I don't think alcohol and cocaine are cunning, baffling, and powerful, but I do believe my ego is. I do believe my ego will creep in on me and it will show up in my life and it'll tell me that I'm not as bad as I think I am. Or it'll tell me just the opposite, is I'm worse than I am. Either way, it wants me dead. And so there's another thing that I do with sponsees too, is I ask them the 4 questions. Are you done good and for all? And then are you willing to go to any lengths is number 2. And you don't have to do this. It's just me. I think I got this from Joe Hawk, I'm pretty sure. And why do you want to do this work? That's the 3rd one. And why do you want to do this work? A lot of times I've heard people say, well, I need my wife back. Well, I can't help you with that, my friend. I hope that happens for you, but I can't help you for that. But why do you want to do this work? Is because I just explained to you what a real alcoholic looks like. Then this book will help you. And then the last thing I ask them is, why me? And usually the typical answer is, because I want what you have. Well, you don't have a clue what I have. But I will tell you what I have. And if you do this work, you'll experience what the rest of us have, is a personal relationship with your creator. That he shows up. He is closer to me than my breath. And he just shows up when I call on him, because he's not a predator. I need to invite him in, and I do that. And then I have a personal relationship with him. So that paragraph says that I have a man in mind. He wants to quit drinking. It's a matter of good business, possibly, and it's always a good business for me to invite people in and me to do the work with them. And every time that I think to myself, man, wouldn't it be nice just to sit in the middle of the room of AA and not do anything? Just like, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. Because us who are on the firing lines or in the trenches, like it never ends, right? I mean, it's a blessing. And dude, when I left Daniel, dude, I was flying high. I came home and I was still like, I was chattering up with my wife and not sharing anything that Daniel and I talked about, but just life in general, how grateful I was for it, right? But sometimes I think, wow, I spent the whole day, and that day I spent, and don't pat me on the back. This saves my life. I'm just saying, I spent all day on Monday doing 3 12 steps. I mean, doing 12-step work all day long. And I was grateful for it. And I went to a meeting that night too. I was so blessed that God has done for me what I could never do for myself. And what is that thing? That is being useful. Because never in my life prior to sobriety, and even in sobriety, when I wasn't practicing these principles on my affairs, I didn't feel useful. And today I feel absolutely useful in my career, in my wife, in our relationship, in my kids and my grandkids' lives, in your lives, and I feel that you're useful in my life. I'm not asleep dreaming I'm awake anymore. So I got there.
Thanks, David. And I know we're already almost out of time. But it's just I suppose with this paragraph with me is like, again, this is a summary of what the requirements of the employer is to do with the employee, but also it's a good time to do, I don't know if we have time to do like a step 1 review. It says you can see he is mentally and physically sick. So he's got the obsession of the mind and he's got the allergy of the body. And yeah, so I think that's all I have on that. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kathy. Does anyone have any questions? We're going to end the 1 minute early instead of starting the next paragraph, which that paragraph that Kathy just read kind of flows into the next one. But we'll do a recap next week, and David should be back next week too. So anybody have any questions or any comments? Nothing, Rob?